What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the All Aussie Rules podcast. This is episode 13, round 5 of the AFL season 2024 is here. Game 1 is tomorrow night. If you're listening to this when it goes live, otherwise it could be tonight, could have already been. But round 5 is here. We're going to preview that tonight's episode. As per usual, we'll have a quick look at the latest news, anything that's happening around the football world. We'll then run through some power rankings for post round 4 going into round 5, preview of all the matches, and then we'll finish off with my tips for this weekend. While we're doing the intro, don't forget to like and comment on this video. Let me know what your thoughts are about this week's footy matches. You can find me here on YouTube or on Spotify. Don't forget to check me out on X and Instagram as well for all my daily thoughts and graphics. Other than that, let's get cracking into this episode. So, latest news released today. AFL have come down with a suspension of 3 weeks for Finlayson for what he said on Friday night in Adelaide. So we won't be seeing him for 3 matches. I won't be commenting on my thoughts, but yeah, no Finlayson for the next 3 weeks. Pickett from Melbourne, he was unsuccessful at the tribunal, so he'll be missing this weekend's game, which is tomorrow night. Other than that, I don't know if there's anything too exciting in the world of football. Looks like a debutant for Melbourne. It looks like what else do we have coming up? Yeah, so Tholstrup has been named for Melbourne, so he'll be making his debut tomorrow night against Brisbane in what should be a good game. And it looks like Errol Goulden is going to be signing a contract extension with Sydney, which is a big get for them. Pretty expected, I think, but a big signing nonetheless. So if we start off now from there, we'll head over to the power rankings for post round 4. Heading into round 5, as always, we'll start at the bottom, we'll work our way up. As you can see on the graphic next to me, that is the full 18 teams. 18 is still West Coast. They were a lot better this week, but they're still 18. North Melbourne 17. They were actually worse. So the gap between those two has definitely closed in the last 7 days. Hawthorn was solid, but they stay 16. Adelaide drop a spot down to 14th. They have not won a game yet. They don't deserve to be anywhere near the 8 at the moment. Richmond, they look like winning a game. They look like winning 2 games in a row. Obviously, they beat Sydney 2 weeks ago, and then this week they just went down to St Kilda after leading certainly most of the first half, or the whole first half, and a little bit of the second half. So they're sitting in 14th. Essendon were pretty ordinary. They're 13th. They got smacked by Port Adelaide. Gold Coast were solid against GWS, but they drop a spot down to 12. Brisbane move up 1 spot. It's hard to know where to put them at the moment. They've got a tough match this weekend. If they win this, they'll probably jump straight back into the 8. They're, of course, playing Melbourne. Western Bulldogs were really good against Geelong, just went down. They've been solid every game this year. They got smacked in round 1 against Melbourne, but since then they've played some good football. We'll see how they go against better opposition in the coming weeks, though, before we know fully where they stand. St Kilda, they got the win against Richmond. Wasn't the best performance of all time, so they stay in 9. Collingwood, likewise, they got the win against Hawthorn, but it wasn't spectacular, but they'll stay in 8 for this week. They have the bye, so we'll see what happens in a couple of weeks when they return to football. Fremantle, they're sitting in 7th. Unlucky not to get the win against Carlton. So they stay 7th. They could move up a spot or 2 in the coming weeks, but they're safely in the 8 at the moment. Geelong, they were good again. They're undefeated. They're 6th. Could they be higher? Maybe. I want to see them beating some quality opposition before I make a decision on exactly where they stand. Sydney, they did get the win, not as convincing as they probably should have. They dropped from 4th to 5th. Port Adelaide, they got a dominant win over Essendon, so they move up to 4th. Carlton stay in 3rd after their win against Freo. Melbourne are staying in 2nd, but they are looking very good at the moment. They beat Brisbane tomorrow night, and all of a sudden, they could be pushing towards number 1. And GWS were good last week. They didn't do anything wrong. Toby Green came back to form. And yeah, so they're sitting in number 1 and haven't really done anything wrong, so that's where they stay. We'll now have a look at the 9 matches for this weekend. No, 8 matches, sorry. Collingwood and Sydney both have a bye this weekend, round 5. First match is Thursday night at the MCG. We've got Melbourne versus Brisbane. Tailored 2 different seasons so far, but for both these teams. Melbourne, they're 4-1, sitting 2nd on the ladder, cruising along. Brisbane, they are 1-3. They finally got their first win last week. It was a dominant win, but it wasn't against much opposition. So big game in Melbourne gives Melbourne a massive edge, I think, in this one. They're flying along. As you can see, the differences in the 2 teams there. Melbourne's very good defensively, conceding 2nd least amount of points per game, and scoring still pretty well with 7th. Accuracy, Brisbane are getting out, just not scoring efficiently or accurately. So their scoring is just way too low because their inside 50 differential is the number 1 in the AFL, but their converting when they go forward is almost the bottom, sitting in 14th spot. Whereas Melbourne are the opposite. They have not been getting clearances. They've not been getting inside 50s. But when they do, they score pretty well. So it's completely different game styles and teams. Yet they both have very similar kick to handball ratios. But Brisbane's, the fact that they getting so many clearances and getting so many inside 50s, you think eventually that's going to turn around to be higher scoring and probably bump that scoring from 8th up until the probably top 4 or 5 where they probably belong. Brisbane finally got their win last week. Melbourne haven't lost since opening round in Sydney. I think just based on that, you'd have to think Melbourne are going to be tough to beat here. Petrarca is flying. He's probably in the top 2 or 3 players of the year so far in the AFL. Definitely in the top 3 midfielders, I think. There's been a bit of publicity about that this week. Who's the best, him, Bont, or Isaac Heaney? I think based on this year, Isaac Heaney's probably playing the best, but overall, I think Bont and Petrarca are slightly ahead of him overall. So that's Thursday night football. We move on to Friday night football, and we have Marvel Stadium, the Doggies versus the Dons. Both teams 2-2. Bulldogs sitting 8th on the ladder, Essendon 12th. Hard to put a pin on exactly where the Bulldogs are. They've been solid. They beat the 2 teams that they should beat. They lost to Geelong narrowly, and they lost in week 1 as well. Quite convincingly lost that one, so they need to show something here. The Dons, however, had been showing okay until last week. They went to Adelaide and played Port Adelaide and got absolutely thrashed. Only managed 6 goals and just got thoroughly beaten. Scoring, Bulldogs offensively and defensively are very good. They're the number 1 accuracy team in the league. Their forward efficiency is very good. Their disposal efficiency is very good. They're just, the whole game style, numbers-wise, is very good. I think probably better than a 2-2 team at the moment, and probably should be looking at a top 8 spot. I don't think they can push into the top 4, but maybe the 6 to 8 spot is where they belong at the moment. Meanwhile, Essendon, they're conceding a lot. As you can see there, they're the 16th best defence, which is not very good. Once again, their accuracy is very good though. They're getting smacked in inside 50 differential, but they dominate clearances, so that's interesting to say the least. They are one of the lower kicking teams in the league, but it's hard to tip them based on what we saw last week. Bulldogs were very good, carried by Libba and Bontempelli. Dons have some injuries also from last weekend, so that's also going to hurt them. They definitely need to turn their form around based on what we saw last weekend. Game number 3 is a Saturday afternoon at Manuka Oval. We have GWS hosting St Kilda. GWS undefeated, 4-0, sitting first on the ladder. St Kilda sitting 9th, 2-2, which quite easily could be 1-3, but they got to escape jail last week against the Tigers, so they're 2-2. They're not in the worst spot. GWS's numbers are very good all around the board. Best offense, 4th best defense, 2nd best accuracy, 3rd in inside 50 differential. They're moving the ball very well. They bounce it from their defence very well. They play very good football. Their midfield's very dominant. Their forward line is cruising. Toby Green returned to form last week. The rest of the forward line had been dominating, and Toby Green had been quiet. He kicked 5 on the weekend though, and I think he also had 4 goal assists possibly. So just dominant display from him and the team. St Kilda conceded the first 6 goals against Richmond and looked in trouble on Sunday last week. They turned it around and managed to fight it out and get a 7-point victory, which is what they needed to beat Richmond. If they had have lost to Richmond in round 4, it would have made their season a very long one, I think. But they got the win, and now this is a big game. It's a tough game for them. If they get the win, all of a sudden they're back in the hunt. If they lose this, and lose this convincingly, it puts a bit of question mark on their season. Obviously, they just made it into finals last year, and lost in the elimination final. So they will be wanting to improve on that spot. But I just don't see it at the moment. Obviously, they have had a couple good wins, but they've also lost a couple matches in the first 4 weeks. Their scoring is probably their biggest concern at the moment. They're getting enough shots on goal, they're just not kicking straight. So I guess if they can turn that around, we'll see a bit of an improvement on that scoring end of things. Their defence, obviously, it's a Ross Lyon team. Their defence is always going to be pretty good. But they've got their work cut out for them this week. It's a big game, but a tough game as well, being against definitely one of the top 2 informed teams of the league, sitting at 4-0 at GWS. Game number 4 is Saturday evening game, 4:35 p.m. kickoff at Marvel Stadium. We have Carlton hosting Adelaide, and this is tale of 2 different worlds at the moment. Carlton sitting 4-0, Adelaide sitting 0-4. Carlton 4th on the ladder, Adelaide 15th on the ladder. Carlton's percentage obviously is a lot lower than other teams that are also on 4 wins, just due to the fact that they've won so many close games. They are Carlton. They beat Fremantle last week by 10 points. They've narrowly beat Richmond. They narrowly beat Brisbane, and I can't think off the top of my head who the other one was, but it was also a pretty narrow win. Their scoring is pretty good. Their defence probably needs to tighten up a little bit, but not too much. The one factor of their game that is struggling is their clearances. It isn't hurting them. They fight out matches. Clearances aren't the biggest concern in football, but they probably want to narrow that from 17th in the league, probably sit around 10th. They wouldn't be too disappointed with. Adelaide, however, they're sitting 0-4. Their season is quickly getting away from them. Week 1, we gave them a forgive against Gold Coast in the rain. Then they've lost to Geelong and Melbourne at home, which is they needed to win at least one of those two. And the other loss, I can't remember who that was against, but that was on the road. And they're sitting 15th, and if they don't start winning games soon, they are going to spiral, I think. But this is not probably the best spot to be trying to turn their season around, going to Melbourne against Carlton. And you'd imagine they're probably going to be 0-5 after this week, which puts them in a very tough spot. They're 17th in scoring, they're 17th in accuracy, they're 18th in forward efficiency, they're 16th in disposal efficiency, and they're 15th in tackle differential. So they're just not up to scratch at the moment, which surprises me because they were one of my picks for the start of the year, but they just have not shown anything worth writing home about at the moment. So we'll see what happens going forward, but you'd imagine they're going to be 0-5 after Saturday evening. Then we have 2 games on a Saturday night. The first one's up on the Gold Coast. We have the Suns hosting the Hawks. Suns are 2-2, sitting on 10th on the ladder. Hawthorn, they're 0-4, sitting 16th. Gold Coast have shown some good signs this year. They've also shown some signs that maybe aren't quite so good. As you can see, both teams struggle in a lot of areas. Scoring offensively and defensively, Gold Coast ranked 12th, Hawthorn are 16th and 15th, so neither team are scoring particularly high or defending very well. Gold Coast numbers are slightly lower because they did have that game in the rain, but even still they're not scoring enough at the moment. Their accuracy is poor, their forward efficiency is poor. There's nothing really that stands out there that says that they're going well enough to be a finals team, in my opinion. Hawthorn, they also just seem a little bit off the pace. Obviously, their second half last week was massive. They came back from 38 points behind Collingwood to get within a kick and just narrowly miss out on getting their first win of the year. Moving Hardwick forward was a masterstroke. I think the plan originally at the start of the year was to have him playing forward. I think from what we saw on the weekend, they just have to have him forward. They have to find a way to keep him forward because I know he's not going to kick 4 goals in a half every week, but he just seemed to have the footy brains up forward. He was leading his opponent to the ball every time. He was reading the play very well. So I think that is a crucial factor in whether they can start scoring a little bit better, having him up forward. They don't move the ball terribly. Like, they're going inside 50 plenty. They're just not really converting. They're not kicking straight, and they're just not putting points on the board. And at the end of the day, the most important part of a game of football is scoring more than the opposition, and they just haven't been able to do that as yet. The other game on Saturday night is at Adelaide Oval. Port Adelaide, 3 weeks in a row playing at Adelaide Oval. So beneficial for them for sure. Whether that obviously they lost the first one against Melbourne, but they beat Essendon last week, and hosting Fremantle this week, you'd have to think they're going to go in heavy favourites. They're 3-1, sitting 6th on the ladder. Dockers are also 3-1, sitting 7th. They were obviously very close to going to 4-0 Fremantle. A bit of a controversial finish, but at the end of the day, that's football. They lost the match, and they can't do anything about that. Port Adelaide's numbers this year, forward efficiency is number 1, and they're scoring second. Their defence is very good at 5th. They're going inside 50 a lot. They're getting a lot of clearances. They are the number 1 kick to handball ratio team in the league. And that's how they move the ball. Just kick it, get it going, keep it going, and it works so far for them. Fremantle, however, they're the best defence in the competition, so that's going to be an interesting dynamic how this match plays out. Number 1 defence against the number 2 offence. But both teams have been very efficient going forward, being Port Adelaide first and Fremantle second. Fremantle's accuracy is costing them a little bit, probably. In the end, probably cost them a little last week. Their disposal efficiency is very good. A concern of this match is going to be the clearances for sure. Number 1 clearance team against the number 18 clearance team. How that plays out, you'd imagine it's going to be a domination from the middle for Port Adelaide, and then Fremantle's defence is just going to try and hold up and try and bounce the ball back and get scores on the rebound. But two completely different teams here. It will be interesting to see how they match up against each other, and being in Adelaide, I think it favours Port Adelaide. If this game was in WA, I think Fremantle would be marginally favourites, but only just. So we have 2 more games on for the weekend. First one on Sunday. Geelong sitting 4-0, sitting 5th on the ladder, coming up against North Melbourne, who are 0-4, sitting 17th on the ladder. Geelong just keep getting it done at the moment this year. Week in, week out, they're just doing enough to win the matches and continue getting the points. North Melbourne, however, they are struggling. Last week was probably even a low point for the year. Like, their season has not been good, and I think last week might have been their worst yet against Brisbane. They just were not in the same league at all. Comparing the 2 teams, I don't know. Geelong's doing what they need to. They're scoring well. They're defending pretty well. Their accuracy is decent. They're not going forward that much, but when they go forward, they do well. So, I mean, that's what you have to do. Their clearance work is good. They've got some good players. You got to remember, this is a team that won a premiership only 18 months ago. They've made some changes. They lost, obviously, Selwood through retirement, and Isaac Smith also through retirement. But they've got some good young players coming through. I need to see them beat someone good, and I need to see them beat the bad teams convincingly. I think they have to go into this game down in Geelong with the mindset that they're winning this by 100 points. If they don't thrash the Kangaroos here, then I wouldn't write them off for the premiership, but it certainly would do a lot for my confidence in Geelong this year if they were to go out and dominate this one convincingly, like they probably should. Kangaroos are just struggling at the minute. The things that are holding them together, they play low pressure games, so they don't bring massive pressure, and also the opposition don't seem to get much pressure on North Melbourne, which is why their disposal efficiency is number 1 in the league. But I want to see North Melbourne change things up. I think they just need to somehow just bring the pressure. I'd love to see them just going hard at it for the full 4 quarters and see what happens. Their accuracy is very good, and that's one reason why they're scoring semi-okay. They're not scoring great, but they're scoring 15th in the league. It could be a lot worse if their accuracy was bad, because their forward efficiency is 16th in the league and their inside 50 differential is 18th in the league. So it would be sorry tale if they weren't kicking straight. We go into the final game of the round, and I don't think this is the most anticipated match of the round, that's for sure, but we've got West Coast hosting Richmond over at Optus Stadium. It is going to be 2 p.m. Australian Western Standard Time, 4 p.m. in the eastern states. Obviously, Eagles are 0-4, sitting at bottom of the ladder. Richmond, they've played an extra game and are 1-4. They almost made it 2-3, having just gone down to St Kilda last week. And to be honest, they're probably not as far off as maybe I thought a couple of weeks ago, because they took Carlton right down to the wire, leading a lot of that game. They've beaten Sydney, and then last week they almost beat St Kilda, having kicked the first 6 goals of the match. So, hypothetically, they could be 3-2. And if they were 3-2, people would be talking about them potentially making the 8. They've still got some very good players. Dusty Martin was very good last week. Their numbers don't suggest that they're going that well. You look at some of the key things, like their scoring and opponent scoring is 13th. Accuracy 11th, forward efficiency 15th, inside 50 differential 16th, clearance differential 15th, the worst disposal efficiency in the game. But their results suggest that they're not that far off, so I don't know what to make of them. They have to go all the way over to WA and play what is, I think, pretty commonly seen as the worst team in the league at the moment. Granted, they were a lot better last week against Sydney. That was definitely their best performance this year for West Coast. But when you're 18th in scoring and 17th in defence, it doesn't suggest you're going too well. None of the stats look good for them. They're struggling. They're too young. They don't have enough star power in their team, and it's costing them. But they do host Richmond. If they're going to get a win, this might be their chance, but you'd have to think Richmond are going to win this, would be my prediction on how this game will go. So that's all 8 matches for round 5. We'll now have a quick look at my tips for the weekend. Who do I think will win each match? As you can see, record for the year, we got 9-9 last week, which was a pretty easy round. Overall, there was a couple close games, but most people tipped 9 of 9, I think. Going into this week, we start with Melbourne-Brisbane in Melbourne. We're going with Melbourne to win that one. Demons by 21. Friday night, we got Bulldogs-Essendon at Marvel. Based on what we saw last week, I think Bulldogs win this. Bontempelli and Libba are carrying the Bulldogs outfit, whereas Essendon have lost a few players and looked ordinary last week. So I got the Bulldogs by 27. GWS are probably the form team of the competition. They're hosting St Kilda in Canberra. St Kilda, it's hard to know exactly where they sit, but travelling to the informed team of GWS, I think you have to go with GWS. I've got them by 19. Carlton hosting Adelaide at Marvel. Adelaide are struggling, so we are going with Carlton. It'll be interesting to see if they actually win a game by more than a kick or two. They certainly haven't been doing that much in their recent probably 6 to 10 wins, however many it is. But you'd expect that they'll win this reasonably comfortably, and to be honest, based on what we've seen this year, it wouldn't surprise me if they won this by 60. We then have Gold Coast hosting Hawthorn on Saturday nights. I think Gold Coast are the better team of these two. Hawthorn did show some signs last week, but if Gold Coast are committed to improving, they have to win this game. I've got them by 45, which seems a lot, but I just don't think Hawthorn are there, even though they took it down to the wire against Collingwood. The other Saturday night game is Port Adelaide hosting Fremantle. Port Adelaide are going well. Fremantle are also going well, but 2 weeks in a row for them playing in Adelaide, obviously having gathered around there last week. It's hard to see Port Adelaide losing this one. I've got them by 27. I think it could be a good game, and probably is match of the round. Melbourne Brisbane could be as well, but I think Fremantle Port Adelaide might be the best we've got on offer this weekend. So I have Port Adelaide by 27. Then the two Sunday games, Geelong hosting North Melbourne. I think Geelong win this convincingly. I haven't played 50, but as I said before, I think if we want them to be a top 4 team, we want to see them winning by more than 50, up towards that 100-point margin, I think. And then the final game, West Coast hosting Richmond. Even though West Coast showed some good signs last week, I just don't see them winning this. They will eventually win a game. I just don't know when it will be, and it will probably be when we don't expect it to happen. But they're hosting Richmond, and I have gone Richmond by 40 points. So that is the 8 games. Obviously, Collingwood and Sydney have the bye this week, and then there's only one more lot of byes before everyone's level up on matches. So next week in round 6, Melbourne and Richmond will be having the bye, and then we've got a few weeks of 9 matches before we head into the mid-season byes, which are across, I think, rounds 12 to 15. So yes, that's football. That's round 5 previewed. Coming up this week, and we've obviously got the games. On Monday, we'll be having our regular episode, which will be a review of the round 5 matches, a look into everything AFL and round 5, where how did your team go, how did everyone's team go. Don't forget to like and comment, let me know what you think of your team, what you think of my thoughts on your team, and yeah, we'll be back on Monday for the wrap up episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch us on the next one.